we proceed with this afternoon's program, we have a brief announcement from the Graduate Student Association here at Moore.
Thank you. My name is Chella Sherman.
I'm Christina Elora.
And we'd like to take just a minute to welcome you to an upcoming event on August 14th at 6 p.m. We will have our thesis exhibitions.
As well as a sneak peek for next year's studio art graduating class. So this involves all of the graduating classes here at Moore in a graduate population, interior design, art ed, as well as us studio art.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Wallis, and I'm also a graduate student here at Moore. I'm in the Social Practices program. And I'm also an artist and an activist from Chicago, which is why I was so excited to have the opportunity to introduce the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials today. They're a group whose work has had an enormous influence on me, and who are actually a really large part of the reason why I decided to go to grad school. They're an inspiring example of the power that visionary arts projects, together with grassroots organizing, have to change the world in real, tangible ways. They started their work with a simple question: what would it look like to build a memorial marking one of the darkest moments in Chicago's history, the systematic torture of more than 100 African American men by the Chicago Police Department under the command of John Burge? As their call for submission said, we aim to make visible the social and political conditions that made torture possible, as well as the acts of courage that ended, or at least brought to light, the culture of impunity that thwarted justice for so long in this instance. Every submission will be an act of solidarity with torture survivors. What unfolded was more than just an art exhibit. A draft ordinance that would serve as a first step towards reparations for the survivors of police torture was created through this project. And this year, thanks to the vision, dedication, and grit of the folks at this table, as well as hundreds of other individuals throughout Chicago, the ordinance was approved by the Chicago City Council. Chicago is the first municipality in the history of the United States to ever provide reparations for racially motivated law enforcement violence. In the next hour or so, Dorothy Burge, Daryl Cannon, Alice Kim, and Sarah Ross will further our thinking about the ways in which art can not only help us better understand our shared history, but also change our collective futures. Jessica Garz, who's currently teaching in the social engagement program here at Moore, will facilitate this conversation. Beyond teaching, Jess currently works in the Arts and Culture program at the Serdna Foundation, a grant-making organization dedicated to supporting the just and sustainable communities throughout the U.S. Given Jess's background, I imagine she'll bring up the intersection and inherent tensions between pragmatism and poetry. Please join me in welcoming our speakers today.
So thank you, Rachel. Your energy and excitement about this project and about Chicago in general is truly contagious. Thinking of moving there myself. But speaking of time, the theme of today, my role here is really not to take up too much of it. Since these four to my left have so much to share with us, I'm rather going to be really the pragmatic clock watcher sitting right here in the corner. So you guys just keep some eyes on me. And I might have to be the poetic interrupter at times as well. So Walida really inspired us this morning to reject this linear notion of time. And we're so fortunate, as Rachel so beautifully just introduced, to be able to hear a brilliant example of a project to see what happens in the present when we actually just take a moment to think about a more just future. So, off to you.
Hi, so we're first going to start by, well, first, thank you to Moore and Philly Mural Arts and everyone who's here. It's just really great to be among pretty amazing people and learning so much while we're here, so thanks. We're first wanted to start off by just saying who we are, since our bio in the pamphlet was sort of a collective bio, but how we all kind of came to this project. So my name is Sarah Ross, and I'm an artist, and I first came to this project, I heard about people tortured by John Burge because I was teaching in a state prison, and I learned from incarcerated people there about the cases.
Hi, my name is Dorothy Burge, and I came to this work because of my interest in social justice. I teach at something called the Associated Colleges of the Midwest, a program that brings students from all over the country to Chicago to learn about human rights and social justice issues. I have been teaching about the John Burge case since 1992.
Good afternoon. My name is Daryl Canning. I am a torture survivor. I'm a continuous worker and warrior for justice in Chicago. And God willing, as we continue to do so, justice will prevail, not only in Chicago, but across America.
Hi, I'm Alice Kim. I came to this work around reparations and the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials through my work as an anti-death penalty organizer. So for years, and then I came to that work through activism around some police brutality cases in Chicago. So I worked with the Campaign to End the Death Penalty, and that's where I learned about the Burge torture cases, and I'll talk more about that now, actually.
Good.
It's not going back.
No, it's fine. I took care of it. So you can go forward now.
How do I, sorry, I get some, oh. That's okay. Locked in an interrogation room in Area 2, police headquarters on the south side of Chicago, Anthony Holmes sat strapped in a chair, his cuffed ankles and wrists attached to wires connected to a makeshift electrocution device. Police Lieutenant John Burge covered Holmes' head with a plastic bag, then cranked the hand-powered generator, electric shocking Holmes while he suffocated. It felt like 1,000 needles going through my body, Holmes said. It felt like something just burning me from the inside. And I shook, I gritted, I hollered, and I passed out. Holmes can't remember exactly how many times Burge repeated this process, but every time he was revived, the plastic bag was placed over his head and the black box cranked again and again. When he couldn't bear the pain anymore, Holmes confessed to a murder he did not commit, a confession that kept him behind bars for 30 years. So Anthony Holmes, pictured there, who testified to the city council what he had experienced, also reminded the city council that in 1973, when he was tortured, no one believed him, and he was not the only one. While he languished behind bars over a span of 2 decades, Burge continued to torture other black men in his custody. It took the city of Chicago 43 years to officially acknowledge and take responsibility for the torture Holmes and all of Burge's survivors endured. So on May 6, 2015, when the city of Chicago passed an unprecedented reparations package for Burge survivors, this victory marked the culmination of decades of struggle by the survivors, their families, and their communities. Thinking about time in relation to the Burge struggle, it becomes so clear that how we experience time is inextricably linked to our freedom, or lack thereof, that it's linked to justice, and it's linked to every facet of our lives, our identities, the color of our skin, where we live, how we're perceived by the powers that be and each other, and our ability to survive, love, and thrive. When I think about the survivors or any person who served time or is still serving time, and their experience of time as a prison sentence, a punishment, a judgment, every moment incarcerated as a devaluing of their humanity. And when I think about all the time Burge's victims spent languishing behind bars, it's really a testament to their resilience and that they were able to maintain their humanity. So the trajectory of this struggle spans the course of decades, beginning in the early 1970s and continuing to this day. Back in 1973, Anthony said no one believed him. In 2015, he and Daryl Cannon, who's here with us today to share his story, and other torture survivors were honored by the mayor and given a standing ovation for all that they had endured and for their role in working on reparations. So I want to give a sense of the struggle. This is the survivors at the City Council meeting. This is the standing ovation. So I want to give a sense of the struggle that took place over the last 3 decades and offer some context for some of the more recent reparations campaigns. So from 1972 to 1991, Burge and his torture ring, comprised of all white detectives under his command, brutally interrogated and tortured at least 110 African-American men and women at Area 2 and Area 3 headquarters in Chicago. These officers used torture tactics ranging from electric shock and suffocation with a typewriter bag to mock executions. Detectives attempted to hang Daryl Cannon by his handcuffs, played Russian roulette with a shotgun as he answered questions, forcing the shotgun in his mouth and chipping his front teeth in the process. They then used an electric cattle prod to repeatedly electric shock him on his genitals. These were the kind of sadistic torture practices of Burge and his men. Daryl drew these pictures illustrating the torture he experienced after he was arrested when he was locked up in Cook County Jail. And still, no one believed him. While Burge arrested, interrogated, and tortured African-American men, he rose in the ranks and was promoted to a commander. It's important to note that the torture took place at a time when the country had embraced a tough-on-crime agenda. It's no coincidence that while Burge was torturing suspects, prosecutors at Cook County Courthouse were playing a game called the 2-ton contest. Upon a successful conviction, prosecutors would weigh the defendant and keep track of how many pounds they had successfully convicted. So for 2 decades, Burge had been allowed to torture with impunity. And it was only due to the courage of the survivors who continued to speak out about what had happened to them and linked up with attorneys, activists, and community members to organize public pressure that the city finally conducted an investigation and fired Burge in 1993. There's a brilliant documentary called The End of the Nightstick that really gives a blow-by-blow of the struggle in the late 1980s and early 1990s that forced city officials to investigate and remove John Burge from the police force. And what you see is the extent, what it actually took to get the city to pay attention to what was happening, the lengths that it took to get the city to investigate, and the extent the city would go to deny and ignore the systematic torture that was happening in their police stations. So this is an image from The End of the Nightstick. And there was many people who came out and confronted the city time and time again to say, look, this is happening, somebody needs to do something about it. Since then, the struggle continued, most conspicuously reigniting and coinciding with the anti-death penalty struggle in Illinois. A group of Burge survivors were sentenced to death in Illinois, and in 1998, they called themselves the Death Row 10, and they came together as a collective to organize public attention on their cases. Theirs is a story that's little known to the public, but it's an important story about struggle and self-organization. It's not an overstatement to say that the Death Row 10 helped to change the course of history. organizing from their prison cells, which Aaron Patterson, one of the Death Row 10, aptly called his war room. The Death Row 10 made the connection between torture and the death penalty explicit at a time when the media's attention was on the issue of innocence. Their cases brought to the fore institutional racism that allowed systematic torture to take place, forced confessions that were used to convict them, and their cases illustrated the complicity of every aspect of the criminal legal system in their race to incarcerate and criminalize Black and brown people. So despite the barriers that were placed on them, the Death Row 10 demonstrated amazing organizing acumen. Stanley Howard, another of the Death Row 10, put together a flyer cut and pasted on death row to announce their first rally in the fall of 1998. This demonstration of about 60 or 70 family members and activists got local and national media coverage, and that night, prisoners and others nationwide saw mothers and fathers of the Death Row 10 marching around the precinct with pictures of their sons and making new trials for them. Another example of the creative resourcefulness of the Death Row 10 is when Aaron Patterson called a birthday rally at Pontiac Correctional Facility, where he and other Illinois death row prisoners were housed. "It's the best way to celebrate my birthday," Aaron said. He was turning 34 at the time. And on his birthday, July 11, 1998, about 40 people rallied in front of the gates of the prison, holding placards and chanting, "Free Aaron Patterson." So the Death Row 10 also participated in countless live from death row events where one of the guys would speak to an audience via amplified speakerphone in real time from their prison cells. You could hear the voices of Stanley Howard or Aaron Patterson or Ronnie Kitchen or Madison Hobley or Victor Saffold, all of whom have since been exonerated and released from their and released. You could hear them describe what happened to them, the injustices of the courts, and you could hear their appeals for justice, not for just themselves, but for all who were on death row. When they spoke, they cut right through the dominant narrative of death row prisoners as the worst of the worst. So their moms were organizers in their own right. They came to planning meetings. They stuffed envelopes with flyers and fact sheets. They marched on Washington, the Republican National Convention, the Million Man March. They rallied in front of Cook County Courthouse. And so alongside activists, the Death Row 10 and their moms and their family members really helped to catapult the end of the death penalty, the exoneration of 6 of the Death Row 10, Burgess' prosecution and conviction, and I believe they helped pave the way for our reparations campaign. So there's so much that can be said about this history of struggle. Over the years, activists took this issue to the police board time and time again. Black People Against Torture raised the issue of Chicago police torture against African Americans in the international arena, taking the issue to the United Nations and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. At home in Chicago, they organized a powerful silent march and strategically used the media attention on Chicago as a possible host site for the 2016 Olympics as an arena to protest police torture. And so prior to the reparations campaign, our movements for justice focused on the legal cases of individual Burge survivors and a demand to prosecute Burge and other detectives. These efforts led to the appointment of a special prosecutor, the establishment of a torture inquiry relief commission, which has since been defunded, and ultimately the federal prosecution and conviction of John Burge. But upon Burge's conviction, it actually became apparent that justice remained elusive for the torture survivors. Some of them remained incarcerated, some had served out their sentences, and some had been able to prove their innocence, but the trauma that they experienced stayed with them. So what Walida said in her remarks this morning rang so true. Trauma and heartbreak travel with us, and this was certainly the case for the survivors and their families. So reparations really was a way to offer redress to the survivors. It was born out of, the idea was born out of town hall meetings organized by Black People Against Police Torture. Following Burge's conviction, we turned to reparations as a way to repair the harm that was done. Our hope was that reparations from the city could offer a real measure of justice to the survivors, something that the legal system by and large had failed to do. And so with the reparations ordinance that we ultimately presented as proposed legislation, we dared to dream. Dorothy is going to talk more about what we want, and Sarah will talk about our exhibits and the central role of art in launching and sustaining our campaign. But I will say that the first public presentation of the original reparations ordinance was on the walls of an art exhibit we curated that was devoted to the Chicago police torture cases. When we asked artists and justice seekers to submit speculative proposals for how they imagined memorializing these cases, I see now that what we were also asking people to imagine was what justice might look like for the torture survivors. And so there was an ensuing campaign comprised of teach-ins, a sing-in, numerous stage demonstrations at City Hall that was strategically timed to make reparations an issue in Chicago's hotly contested mayoral election. Our efforts were emboldened by the Black Lives Matter movement and an influx of young Black activists determined to realize reparations for survivors like Holmes, Daryl Cannon, and Mark Clemens, who showed up and spoke out at every event the campaign organized. And it was really only because of this movement that 4.5 decades later, we were finally able to win a measure of justice for the survivors. So I want to show actually a video that gives you a sense of this campaign.
We still
So I'll just say, as I hand it over to Sarah, that I detailed what the torture looked like and tried to give a sense of some of the history of the struggle involved. To say that the story phenomenal today, the story about Burge and this history of torture in Chicago is also it's a horror story, but it's also a story about hope.
I got into the group in early 2012 when a call for memorials had already gone out. And at that time, organizers were interested in the fact that, exactly what Alice said, that even though Burge had been convicted, it didn't feel like justice had been done. And so the idea of a memorial was a way to think about how a public thing like a memorial that is often usually officially sanctioned by the city or a state could be used in this way to actually bring attention and justice, or to think about the justice that was needed for torture survivors. To get people to think about memorials in a really expansive way beyond statues or other kind of static objects, potentially, the group organized design charrettes and roundtable discussions in several locations around the city. So we had a series of different kinds of calls. And the discussions served as a place and time for people to learn about the history, to learn about the cases, and specifically I think it was a space in which artists could see themselves, could figure out how to use their tools to be involved, to add to this open call and to add to the struggle for justice for survivors. Survivors like Daryl and others came and talked about their experiences of what a memorial could look like, what a memorial could be. And after several months of the open call, we got more than 70 proposals from around the world, and we organized an exhibition at the School of Art Institute's Sullivan Gallery, and the show is called Opening the Black Box, The Charge is Torture. We made decisions to show all the work, all the proposals that came in. We didn't curate any of it, and we wanted to make sure that we had sort of an open, kind of transparent process in that way. So the consequences, there are some like really wacky, weird, and cool stuff, and also kind of funny, preposterous stuff as well. So as a group, we organized the show. Here's a couple of examples of pieces. Somebody proposed to put an ad on the bus to have a silent car that would be a moment on the train where you could have reflections. There's architectural proposals. This somebody proposed to add an image to the Chicago police badge. Other people, an artist group called Lucky Pierre, came up with a whole series of actions and invited people to think about 100 actions that could be done for torture survivors. There's a quilt called A Moment in Time, and a Stitch in Time, and people added to the quilt collectively. There were videos, sculptural works, works from incarcerated people, proposals like adding the electric shock clips to the building itself where the torture happened, and so on and so forth. This works from a man from Argentina whose brother was disappeared, and so there was a connection, an international connection. And this project was done by a school teacher who is also an artist who got his whole class to come up with masks in the classroom. There is a kind of open call to faculty and teachers to include the history in their classes and make memorial proposals. So it really was trying to think about what a memorial can look like and so how to be really expansive about it. For the exhibition, we as CTJM developed other parts of other things to bring to the show. So this had been developed early on, a torture index that details all the sort of numbers associated with this history. We created a wall of the names of everyone who at that time we knew who had been tortured, and we asked survivors who came to sign their name to the wall. And so this is a moment where everyone gathered. It was really quiet, and it was this sort of really moving time. We also made a timeline of the history of the cases, and we had some of the artworks throughout. The timeline included all kinds of things from the activism to the newspaper articles, etc. And again, it really became a sort of a pedagogical project as well as an exhibition. And we used it as a space to really call people in. The open call was ongoing, and so people continued to make work. We had video documentation of a roundtable that had happened, and then Alice and other people organized really great programming, like Writers Against Torture, Film Festival Against Torture. We had Josh McPhee, an artist, come out and do screen printing workshops. And one of the main proposals was a reparations ordinance. So as Alice mentioned, that idea had been around, and so one of the lawyers involved wrote up an ordinance of what it could look like and put that in the exhibition. So the next step that we did was we actually organized another exhibition to think more about reparations and what it really could look like. If this is something we were going to take seriously and kind of put forward, we thought we would use the space of an exhibition to think about how what an ordinance can look like. And so we looked at reparations from around the world and around the nation. And like I said, memorials were still being made and proposed. And so we included those in this exhibition as well. For instance, this is one of the proposals, which was adding a 5th star to the city flag of Chicago, which is kind of all around the city as city flags are. And each star of the city flag means something specific. I have no idea what any of them mean, but I'm sure all like great things. And we wanted to add a 5th star, not great things. We wanted to add a 5th star that would be about this history. And then a teacher in town who works at an art college got all of her students to engage in sort of making these flags and adding a 5th star. So these are just examples of how the call was really a kind of expansive place to ask people to use the tools of art with a kind of precision to think about how we could use the tools of art with an aim that would be specifically about a kind of education and not letting this history go. So in this image here, you can see behind the speakers, we had documentation and research from places like Kenya, Chile, Germany, Argentina, South Africa, and recently won reparations in North Carolina for women who are sterilized, all as examples of the potential for reparations in Chicago. We brought in speakers to talk about reparations around the world, musicians and poets performed, and each time we had an exhibition, we're really thinking about how to capture this small amount of time, this really moment in this much, much longer history, to think about critical issues, to plan policies, to radically imagine justice. If the gallery is a mythical clean slate with its white walls, then we used that space to continue to write histories of this story of police torture and used art and creative production at every turn of the campaign to think about how you can ask people, you sort of open up a door and bring people in to think creatively and imaginatively. Outside the gallery, we formed alliances with other groups in the city. Between September 2014 and May of 2015, we worked with Amnesty International, a group called We Charge Genocide, and Project NIA. I just want to give a shout out to well, all those groups, but We Charge Genocide and Project NIA are both local anti-racist abolitionist groups who do really amazing work. Many of the people involved you saw in the video that Alice played. And they also are using poetry and art at every turn to really bring people in and to sort of open up our imagination of how justice could be enacted and be achieved. So we organized a march and a rally in downtown Daly Plaza. We made names, we made banners with the names of every torture survivor known at that time. And at the end of the rally, we read the names of all the survivors, and people lined up to face City Hall. And this particular event, along with other exhibitions, all had different kinds of impacts for different people who were there. In this particular event, I just remember about how long it took to read the names. It took a long time, and the crowd was really quiet in an otherwise kind of busy downtown. It was a really solemn moment, and it took this time, even this sort of brief moment in time, to kind of translate the other kind of time, the kind of long time of intentional racism, of violence that was acted on survivors, the time it took to get people's voices heard. So in this moment of this sort of action, using sort of all the politics and the training, if you will, of visual culture and performance, it was a moment where, again, we were thinking about how to use creative culture at every turn. But at this time, the reparations ordinance had been sponsored by a few aldermen in Chicago, but it was not being brought to a vote in a finance committee. So the first committee in the finance committee is the first committee in the city of Chicago City Council that would bring the ordinance to a second vote, which would be in City Council. So it was clear that the city was really dragging its feet in trying to make the ordinance go away, so we really had to make some noise. And that meant using media skills, using organizing skills, using lawyerly skills, and visual skills. So we organized press conferences. We had a holiday march from police headquarters to City Hall. We created impromptu memorials. Slow my size. There was a die-in. There is a light brigade at the mayor's house. So some of these images you saw in the video. We had a Valentine event. Again, images you saw in the video at Chicago Temple. And afterwards, we used the banners again to stretch the names of all the survivors across the sidewalk in downtown facing City Hall. There was a train takeover, so again, you saw these images in the video, but just to explain what some of them are. So there's a train takeover where people use the space of a train car to talk about the issues and vote for who you would vote for mayor. And another thing that was important was at this time people were really connecting what was happening around reparations to all the other kinds of violences and egregious police brutality that was happening around the country. These really beautiful banners, one says reparations now, one says transformation now, were made by people from recharged genocide. And they felt like the reparations was a really great start, but a total transformation of how we live is also needed. We brought people out to the finance committee over and over again, to City Hall over and over again. We had an exhibition outside the mayor's office, and we brought in school groups. We had docents at the exhibition outside the mayor's office. Again, connecting it to other things that are happening around the country. We had tons of hashtags. Young kids were asked to come up with images of what reparation would look like, and they all got photographed. We had a speak out. We had teach-ins at schools across the city, and eventually reparations is finally passed. So that's just a kind of snippet of some of the things that happened, because it really was a lot of work, and there's a lot of visual culture produced. And so, and it was produced by both artists and maybe non-traditional artists alike, and all of it was equally as important and equally as powerful. And again, I think that speaking to in an art school, one thing that was really amazing is to use this frame of art to pull people in, to give people a space who might not otherwise feel like that they can participate, because it's something called reparations, where people are calling their aldermen, or using law skills, for instance, to write a reparations ordinance. But as artists, we can use a whole other set of skills to open this up.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Daryl Cannon. On behalf of myself and our group, we would like to thank Mural College as well as Assistant Professor / Program Director Daniel for having not only the courage but the fortitude to get us here to speak to you today. Art is many forms, whether it's pictures, whether it's someone telling a story that allows you to paint a picture in your mind of what you're hearing. My job is to paint a mental picture for you of some atrocities that did in fact happen in Chicago, Illinois. Here stands before you is a man that did 24 years in prison. 24 years straight. Out of those 24 years, my last 9 years was did in a supermax prison where I was locked up 24 hours a day. My bed consisted of a concrete block with a paper thin mattress. Through it all, God allowed me to survive. And He allowed me to survive, I feel, because I need to be an advocate on behalf of those in Chicago who have been wrongfully convicted and placed in prison at the hands of some sadistic so-called detectives. I'm often asked, do I have a hatred for the police department? And I'm quick to tell you no. I most certainly do not. The police department did not torture Daryl Cannon and place him in prison. Some sadistic individuals posing as police officers did it. So my hatred is only for them. Please know that during my arrest of November the 2nd, 1983, up until then, I didn't have too much knowledge of racism. But that particular day, I got a crash course of what racism is all about. And now I clearly understand what black people felt in the South when they was tortured by the Ku Klux Klan. Because what these particular all-white detectives did to me, borderline, beyond a shadow of a doubt, of viciousness, racist, barbaric situation where I wouldn't want for my worst enemy. During that day of my arrest, they took me to a torture site and they got me out of the detective car and I'm handcuffed behind my back. And again, I will repeat to you what they said to me. They told me, they said, nigga, you're in for the hardest day of your life. Now, for me, I only took that to mean that maybe they were going to beat me up a little bit and try and get me to confess to a murder that I did not commit. But Lord and behold, what they did to me, one of the detectives hit it right on the head when he said, we have a scientific way of interrogating niggas like you. And during that day, they tried to hang me by my handcuffs, which was cuffed behind my back. They wrinched my shoulders. When that didn't work, they took a shotgun, and I'm still cuffed behind my back. And they told me, so nigga, listen. And they took a shotgun shell. They had the shotgun, and they turned their back to me. And I thought what I was hearing was the shotgun shell being placed up in the chamber, and the chamber jacked up, because when the detective turned back around, I don't see the shotgun shell, so I got to assume it's in the chamber. He said, nigga, you gonna tell us what we want to hear? I said, nope. He said, open your mouth. Now either he was crazy or he thought I was crazy. Because no way on God's green earth I'm gonna voluntarily open my mouth and let you stick a shotgun barrel in my mouth. So they had to force it in. And how he forced it in is he kept jamming the shotgun barrel in my mouth until he split my lip and chipped my 2 teeth. And when he got the barrel of that shotgun in my mouth, Another detective said, now you gonna tell us what we want to hear? I tried to say no. And another detective said, go ahead, blow that nigga's head off. And he pulled the trigger. Now they did this mock execution 3 times. The 3rd time they did it, to show you how the human mind is, as soon as I heard that click, the hair, on the back of my head stood straight up. As if he had just blown my brains out. But still, Daryl Cannon was pretty strong. That didn't work. So the next thing they did, and this is to show you how sadistic they are, they put me in the back seat of a detective car, turned me sideways, my feet was outside the car. They took a 9mm, put it to my head, said, nigga, don't move. They redid the handcuffs, and they put the handcuffs in front. And they had me to sit sideways in the back seat of the detective car. One detective went around behind me, got in, told me to raise my arms. When I raised my arms, he pulled the handcuffs, which made me lay back. They pulled my pants and my shorts down, and they took an electric caliper. And they repeatedly stuck me with the electric caliper, sticking me on my testicle everywhere. I had never felt pain like that in my life. And they continued to electroshock me. And the bad part about it, they enjoyed having me holler. I yelled so much that I became hoarse, where I couldn't even speak. Now, please know that I don't hurt today. I don't hurt. So if you see me emotional, I'm emotional because I'm just that mad. Every time I relive this, I get just that mad. And I will probably have this hatred for the rest of my life, because what they did to me was unthinkable. What they did to me is something that in the United States of America, you never expect to endure anything like this. But again, that's why I'm blessed to be able to come to places like this to speak to all of you. People in Chicago in prison say I am their voice, that I tell the real deal about what happened. And this is why I am so passionate about speaking. Do you know that anytime I speak about this, before I do so, I have to take a big swig of Pepto-Bismol. Yes, and I've often said I'm going to write that company. They should pay me some. I have placed them on the map, you know, and I have to do so because of the fact that I get just that nauseous at the stomach each and every time that I relive this. And it doesn't get any easier. But you know what? I learned a long time ago that if you stay silent, you're part of the problem. If you speak about it, you're a part of the solution. And me speaking, you know, believe it or not, out of hell came a measure of pleasure, because people like Daniels have sponsored me to come here to Philadelphia, which I fell in love with, and before the day is over with, the same steps that Rocky ran up. That God has allowed me to survive. Do you know that they tried to kill me even in prison? They slowly poisoned me. in Supermax. My weight went from 215 down to 180. And just so happened, I was blessed enough to get my freedom. And the first thing my family wanted to do was have me to have a full physical checkup. And I just knew I had ulcers because my hatred is, ongoing. But thank God, when they did the physical and put that tube down your throat with the camera and seeing that I did not have no kind of holes in my stomach, thank God. But my liver was damaged, and because they found arsenic in my liver. And so I had to take special liver medication in order to reverse and to stop the damage. And thank God that my weight has started to come back up again, and I feel better. But please know that Chicago is not the only place that atrocities like this has occurred, as we all know, and as we all have seen on TV continuously. So people need to know that there is a solution. And sometimes burning and looting is not the solution. Violence can sometimes breed violence. We in Chicago are very proud of the reparations that we achieved. Never in the history of America have black people ever received any measure of acknowledgement, not even in torture, not even in slavery. So we're proud of what we have achieved, but there's still a lot of work to be did. And because of that, people like us and others that you not see here today, we will continue when we are able to travel and to speak to people about atrocities that exist, and to say that if you desire to make a change in the city that you live in, you can do it. Ain't no such thing as it's impossible. I probably, Da Vinci, when he first started drawing, he probably thought this stuff wasn't going nowhere. But look at it today. The Mona Lisa. When that was first did, I don't think he had envisioned that Mona Lisa today would still be a portrait to behold. I have had a measure of educating since I've been out of prison. I went to the art museum in New York. Oh, it's fascinating, and now I'm here. And I've been able to go to other places that I probably never went if it had not have been for the hell that I went through. So, God has a way of balancing everything out. And guess what? Since I've been home, I also work for 2 different law firms. And my job is to serve summons and subpoenas. And who do I serve them on? Cops and state attorneys. Now the only thing the city of Chicago refused to give me is a gun. No, we're not getting you the gun there, okay? Everything else you can have. So you see, I like to call it poetic justice. And every time I serve a cop, I have a smile. Hi. And now the cops know me. And they'll call down to the lawyer's office, what the hell, you got Daryl Candy coming out here serving me or something? Because he's an officer of the court. So you see, never believe that crap about everybody that's been to prison. When they come home, they'll end up going back to prison again. That's not true for everybody. And please know that Daryl Candy went in prison a gang chief. Daryl Candy came home an independent, educated, strong man. My ties are still to my community. I was supervisor of ceasefire. The place that they call Chirac, that was my beat. And as supervisor of ceasefire, the 10 months that I had that area, we had no fatalities of any kind. None, zero. And I did such a good job that the mayor did not renew our contract. Said that the police can do it, you know, but we showed them that civilians can't do it, you know. But here again, I will continue to do whatever I need to do to make a difference in my community as well as in America. We're not stopping just in Chicago. Chicago set the foundation. So now we intend to take that foundation to any city that would like for us to come there, and we will give them our blueprint on how we did it. You've seen the videos. Police involved us. Why? Because we stayed on the right side of the law. None of us are afraid to go to jail now. You know, please know that. We're not afraid, but you know, history teaches us at some point in time, you cannot keep the same pattern to affect a change, meaning riots and things of that nature. At some point, you have to get educated. Like Alice told you, we chose to pick the times when the mayor was up for re-election. And we didn't go up against any kind of mayor. Anybody that knows anything about our mayor knows that he worked up under 2 presidents. So he's very intelligent. He's very savvy. But here's the thing that he did not count on. People power. People make the difference. We, the people, made the difference. We made him come down off his high horse. We made him tell the city council, don't play with them. Go ahead and approve this reparations, and let's get this off the table. So we're thankful, and we're saying for any and all of you, anybody that needs to know the blueprint, we're glad to give it to you. Make no mistakes about that. And for a question that you don't even have to ask me, I will tell you. If you think that I have a hatred for white people because of me having been tortured by a group of sadistic so-called white people, please know that I have never been racist in my life, and I never will. White people did not torture Daryl Cannon. Just a few sadistic individuals tortured Daryl Cannon who happened to be white. So please know that Daryl Cannon's head is on straight. Daryl Cannon was continuing to be strong because the women in my family showed me that if you stand up and you stand tall, then you're going to always win. And Dr. King echoed that when he said that a man can't ride your back if it's not bent. My back has never been bent. My back will never be bent. So on that note, I would say thank you, and thank you.
So I want to go back a little bit and just talk a little bit about reparations. And one of the things that I want to start off by talking about is, what is it? What is reparations? So to us, reparations was a way for us to make, or to have the city make amends for something that they had done. Not just to one person or a set of persons, but to a whole community of people. I like to say that what happened in the African American community because of John Burge and his Midnight Crew, that's what they were called, was like in the black community what happens when a lynching occurs in an African American community. A lynching is designed for everybody in that community to get in line, to know their place, whatever those people think their place should be or their place is. And so I think that this whole process, we were moving and moving from 1972 to 1991. John Burge tortured African American men and women on the south side of Chicago. It was not a secret. People knew this was happening. People talked about it. State's attorneys knew about it. Doctors knew about it, reported it. And so through this whole process, there was a whole group of people who knew what was going on and stayed silent. And so we talk about this midnight crew, and we talk about kind of the struggle that we kept going for years as we tried to make people accountable for what was happening. But after years of struggle, John Burge, and using the traditional criminal justice system, John Burge was brought to trial, but time had expired on us because John Burge was not tried for torture. John Burge was tried for lying about the torture. The statute of limitations had run out. So, as a result of torturing over 100 African American men, John Burge received a sentence of 4.5 years. And so, we, as activists, as survivors, as community people, said, where is the justice in this? And so that's when we began to look at a different way of approaching this. So the criminal justice system didn't work. So can we look at something else? Can we look at a different kind of system? Can we look at a restorative justice system? Can we say that we are concerned about not the crime that was committed, but we're concerned about the harm that was caused. We're concerned about the harm that was caused to individuals and to communities, specifically the African American community, where our men were taken and tortured and our men are going to return. And so that was important to us, that we use this framework and we focus on repairing the harm that was done to individuals and to this community. We believe that the victim's perspective, and we don't call them victims, the survivor's perspective, is key to everything that we do. So we want the survivor's perspective, we want the survivor's input, we want the input of the family members and the community members on everything that we do. And that process is really, really important to the work that we have. And that is one of the reasons why when we sent out the call for the art proposals, that we felt that everybody who submitted something deserved to have their submissions seen. And that was really, really important. So we wanted something that would make the city of Chicago be accountable for what they had done to the survivors and to the community. And we wanted to do this in a way where the community would have a say and be actively involved. And so this reparations ordinance was written by one of the Justice Memorial members, who is an attorney, and these are the things that we asked for. We asked that education be a part of this reparations package. We want people in Chicago public schools to know what happened in Chicago. We want them to know what kind of society produced a John Burge and the people who work for him. We want people to know what was going on in Chicago in 1972, right after the murder of Fred Hampton Jr. from the Black Panther Party. What was the climate in Chicago? What was happening from 1972 to 1991 that would allow this kind of behavior to be acceptable to a whole group of officials in the city of Chicago? So we want that taught in Chicago public schools. And the ordinance says that it will be taught in 8th grade and in 10th grade. And then our struggle was not just to have it taught, but how is it going to be taught? And so that's our struggle right now. So if we're talking about time, our struggle now is we have won these things, but what will they really look like? So our negotiation now is, what is this educational package going to look like? And the fact that we reject the notion that this is something that's going to be taught in February, as they proposed to us in Black History Month. Because we don't believe this is a Black history issue. We believe this is a Chicago issue, and it should be spoke about and taught about in that manner. So the second thing that we want is a formal apology from the City of Chicago. Mayor Rahm Emanuel gave us that apology. However, it's an apology that kind of worked against us in some ways, because when we started going out to talk to the aldermen about reparations, some of the aldermen would say to us, you know, the mayor apologized. What more do you people want? We want to be made whole. We want a process that acknowledges not just what you did. We want you to acknowledge what you did and then to begin to repair some of that harm. So, the apology. We want college tuition at the city colleges for the survivors and their family members. What does that mean? It means the survivors, their spouses, their children, and their grandchildren. The survivors, as you well know, this began to happen in 1972. Some of our survivors are in their 60s, late 60s. So it's easy to grant them city college tuition because guess what? People are thinking they're not going to go anyway. So we want this to be something that is real and usable, and that's what we're fighting for. $5.5 million in financial compensation. What we really asked for in the very beginning was $20 million. And so this is what we agreed on, because this allows the survivors to have an amount that I don't think is sufficient, but it is an amount that they said they were okay with. And because they are the people who were most impacted, it was a decision that they had to make. Public Memorial is where we are concentrating our work. The Public Memorial and the Counseling Center for the Survivors. That's where we are right now concentrating our work. We are spending our time as members of this committee reaching out to other members who have the expertise that we don't have to tell us what a counseling center should look like, who should be involved, what kind of counseling should be available. But all the time looking back to the survivors and those people who were impacted to say, what is it you want and what is it you need? And we think that public art is going to be a critical part of this process. And so we are very, very pleased at the response that we have gotten from the artists who are involved in this process. And these artists are not just visual artists, they are people who are doing spoken word, who are doing writing projects, who are doing music. And so it has been an incredible experience to be a part of this. One of the things that I want to say that has been really, really important for me is the fact that this has been an intergenerational approach, and that the energy that the young people brought to this campaign and this struggle has just been incredible and tremendous. And so what we really want to do is we want to give examples of what happens when people don't give up, when you continue to struggle. I've been working on this issue since 1992. And so it's important to me to see reparations, one, but it's also important to me that it be done in a way that values the struggle and the survivors and the community that was impacted. So we want to inspire with our reparations movement people not to give up. And this is the time, since we're talking about time, that we feel that we need to recommit ourselves as activists, because while some people are out and they got reparations, other people are still incarcerated, and this reparation ordinance does not cover everybody who was tortured by the Chicago police. So we want to recommit ourselves at this time that the struggle is not going to end here. So I want to end with one of my favorite songs these days, and that is Glory from the movie Selma. And Carmen says that no one can win the war individually. It takes the wisdom of the elders and the young people's energy. So I have revised that. Don't get mad, Carmen. I just wanted to say that no one can win this battle individually. It takes the wisdom of everyone and all types of energy. And that I also, in the spirit of time, want to say that democracy is not fast. It's a slow process. And even though we have won reparations, we are beginning the process of reparations. Some people in the city are saying this closes the chapter. We're saying no, the book is not closed. We are beginning the process of healing and reparation. Thank you.
One more time, a thank you to all four of you on the panel. Alice. So I looked at my watch, I think only once. I was too captivated to keep us quite on time. But speaking of that, I think we have about 10 minutes to open up the floor for questions. So if you just give a hand, Daniel will run over with the mic.
So that was amazing presentations. I want to apologize. I had my computer in front of me and I was tweeting, but then I couldn't resist looking up a little bit of the political backstory because it's such a horrific and also inspiring story. And I saw that Mayor Daley, was just denied the whole thing for decades and refused to apologize. And then, of course, with Rahm Emanuel, as you stated. So can you talk a little bit about the political changes that led the establishment to have to acknowledge the torture?
We refused to go away. we were going to be heard, and they were going to eventually give us a measure of justice. That's why we were at City Hall, not only at City Hall, but at the mayor's office, right outside his office door. We made him bring in extra security because we were not going away. We was outside the mayor's office, outside the mayor's home, outside of Alderman's home. We targeted every central area that we needed to target in order to make sure that our voices were heard, and we intend to continue to do so.
Another thing that was key in this is the election. So Rahm Emanuel, who thought he was a shoo-in for re-election and thought that he would not have any serious challengers, was actually pushed into a runoff. And it was then that his tone changed. He became less arrogant. He began to apologize for his arrogance. And one of the reasons that he was pushed into this runoff election is that he had lost substantial support in the African American community. And I'm sure that that played a key role in the ability for an ordinance that had sat in a committee for over a year to finally be brought up for a vote.
And also, too, I'd just add that the sort of national landscape of police murder and racist police activity was, sort of bubbling up all around him as a mayor and in the city at large. And meanwhile, cases are still being litigated. There's some people that their cases can be litigated. And so the city was paying out money still to people who were both tortured by Verge, but also other police officers and other police murders, right? So I think that all that kind of activity contributed to the climate in which we could move this forward.
I know not every one of us have to respond, but just to say historically in this struggle, at every step of the way, anytime we were able to get the city to do anything over the last few decades, it's because people organized. So even Joe Moreno, who was one of the aldermen who sponsored the ordinance, he was actually previously an activist with the campaign to end the death penalty. When the ordinance passed, he reminded everyone that 10 years ago, he was not alderman, right? He was standing outside of City Hall holding a banner called "Verge Equals Torture." So I think that that's the kind of thing that it took at every step of the way.
Plus, they knew that our integrity could not be compromised. Last year, they secretly told my attorneys that it was possible that I could receive over $2 million if I stopped talking and stopped going before the press and things of that nature there. And this was, of course, all off the record that this conversation was had. And when the lawyers told me about it, I said, well, you can go back and tell them, I will continue to speak. I'm going to be their worst nightmare. They can keep all the money that they're offering me, they can keep. Because sometimes integrity cannot be bought with no amount of money. And like I said before, God allowed me to survive my hell for a reason. And so I wasn't going to allow money to get in the way of me representing all those who were in prison. And when the judicial system seen that, when the political world seen that in Chicago, they knew then that their fight was over with and that they had to give us what we wanted. And as a result of that, we got it.
I had two quick comments and a question. First, Mr. Cannon, I have to say I'm struck by how young you appear to me. I don't understand it, but I admire the hell out of it. Two is I live in New Orleans and we need you in Louisiana. Bad. So I'll talk to somebody afterwards. My question is about the art, and I really felt like the video and the examples that you showed were like an encyclopedia of movements of the last 30 years, 30 or 40 years. Queer movements, immigrant movements, civil rights movements, all the different strategies. And how did you, I mean, was that just because everybody could do what they wanted? Was there some kind of structure for creating strategies and choosing them? What was the structure, I guess, is my question.
What we did natural. You know, nobody had a prescript of what to do, how to do it. Instead, the artists, we say, how do you want to express yourself about what we're trying to achieve? And they came up with various drawings, art that they wanted to do. And it fell right in with everything that we needed to express. So we had a broad vision of being able to express ourselves verbally, physically, and with pictures. So we covered the whole spectrum. And I think that is what made us as successful as we've been.
I also just said that I think that the open call kind of really generated this space and moment. Like I said, I kind of came into the group around that time, and I remember this conversation about, like, you know, we were going to curate the open call, where we were going to curate these images that are coming in, some of which didn't look like, you know, memorials that we might even think of in our, you know, not the things that we would do. But the decision was no, as a political decision, we weren't going to curate it, we were going to keep that door really open. And so I think that was kind of amazing. And one of the things I really wish I remembered to bring is that really beautiful poetry slam by Kumba Weeks. And I think that you know, this is a young group of poets in Chicago that won a big poetry slam in the city this year. And I think that kind of open call invited all kinds of people like them, you know, 2 years after the open call, to make this amazing piece that really carried on this message, carried on the history, carried on the movement. And so it really was a ripple effect. I feel like that's a kind of like not an adequate cliche, but I do feel like it did that.
Yeah, I also think it's really important that we recognize that art means different things to different people, and that what some people consider art, other people don't consider art, and we didn't want to make that distinction. And so it was important to us, if you make art, that your art would be acceptable to you.
At the open call in our first exhibit displaying all of the submissions that we received, I think really set the stage for the campaign that followed. because during those 2 months, we had events at the exhibit on a weekly basis. We had a film festival against torture. You know, people could come in and we made silk screens, and you know, the flag that Sarah spoke about ended up becoming the emblem of our movement. So it was on T-shirts that people wore all over and continue to wear today. And there were all sorts of, it became an organizing space. So the Sullivan Gallery became an organizing space. And I think because of that, that really set the stage. In the reparations campaign, when we first introduced it, it kind of stalled in the finance committee for quite a while. And we had to, you know, we had to galvanize ourselves and the communities. But I think that because this exhibition, these 2 exhibitions preceded the campaign, we were really able to involve artists from the get-go. And I think that many of us activists were really influenced by being part of this process. It really opened our minds, like sort of suddenly it's like, oh wow, you don't always have to be thinking about compromising and being practical, or whatever, the things that you can imagine. Suddenly, you know, once you're thinking about actualizing them in an exhibit, and once you've stated it, it suddenly seems much more possible. And I think artists were really moved because they felt like their art, you know, actually made a difference. They got to meet people like Daryl, so we'd have this, you know, we'd have a tour of the exhibit, but Daryl would be part of it, right? So I think that it was just, it was a space where we built a new community that really paved the way for the active reparations campaign that followed.
Another thing that I just want to say very quickly is that some of the art became so symbolic that it became like part of the movement. And one of those things that fit that criteria is the flag with the extra star, the black star that they came up with. Because the 4 stars on the Chicago flag represent key events in Chicago history. So the 2 World's Fairs, the Chicago fire that destroyed the city that then had to be rebuilt, and Fort Dearborn. And so this star says that this is a major stain on the city of Chicago's image. And so I have had probably 10 T-shirts in the last couple of years, and people are laughing now because every time I go to an event I have to get another T-shirt because young people stop me on the street. When I say young people, I'm talking about the 20-year-olds, 20, 30-year-old. So miss, where'd you get the shirt? Is that for the police torture? Yes, it is. Yes, you know, I'm thinking I'm going to come out. Are you really? Yeah, I need a shirt. Just a second. I always have another one in my bag. Just a second. Let me give you this shirt, but you will be there, right? So, yeah, I think that the T-shirts have been, to me, an incredible organizing.
Yes, ma'am. We have time for one more question. I saw
Far, far away.
My question deals with more why we did not hear more about this in national media.
Ah, that's easy.
What I was going to say is with the police shootings, you know, there was this backlash movement in white communities or police communities that talk about white lives matter, police lives matters, as if they were the victims. And with what happened in Chicago, you know, it really typifies what our relationship is with the police. And there was, unless I missed it, there's very little reporting about what was happening in Chicago and about this movement.
I found out yesterday from talking to some people at a place that we went to, they had never heard about the reparations. You know why? Because good news does not make news. Only bad news make the national news. So now, if we had had a riot in Chicago, you'd have heard about that on the news. But when the system finally does something right, oh no, we can't talk about that. Why? Because we don't want this to spread in other places. Well, we're just the opposite. You know, we want it to spread. We want peace. You know, we don't want violence, we want peace. Chicago got the reparations through peace, not through violence. So we're saying that if we can do it, and keep in mind, the 1968 convention, the police went berserk. They beat students half to death because they was protesting during the convention. And that was all on the national news. But the reparation got, I think, maybe every bit of 3 minutes on a couple of national news stations. Ooh, that's it, I don't want to talk about that. You know, because they rather have cities in chaos than peace to affect change. So that's why you didn't hear about it.
There was some national and international coverage, though, and I think that what's important to note about the coverage that did exist, though, is that how the story was told was very top-down. You don't actually see this. You don't know that the reparations ordinance was first on the walls of an exhibit. You don't see the grassroots activism. It's sort of that suddenly Mayor Rahm Emanuel decided to do this really great thing, right? So I feel like doing the exhibits also meant that we had to stop and document ourselves, because we did create a timeline, a visual timeline of the struggles over the course of the years, and we're continuing to do that, and the importance of actually doing that, because otherwise these stories and our story won't actually get told.
Absolutely.
And I want to piggyback on this issue of telling your own story, because the African proverb is, until the lion learns to write, the hunter will always be the hero. And so one of the things that we've been finding out, just in the way the reparations ordinance has been reported, is something that I think could be very destructive if we aren't paying attention to it. And so even if they're not giving Rahm Emanuel credit for reparations, the media, the mainstream media, has written African Americans out of this whole struggle. And so that is why it is important that we document our struggle and what we did and who was involved.
Absolutely.
Thank you once again, Daryl. We're going to ask you to wait a couple hours before you run up the stairs of the Art Museum like Rocky. Our final panel this afternoon is going to bring us home to Philly.
Yes,
so maybe we can all just run down the parkway together. Before we bring it back here, we're going to have a 10-minute break out in the lobby, so we can all go. I think we're all adequately invigorated by your panel. If some folks need a little caffeine or a little sunlight, we're going to grab that, and then we'll all meet back here just before
3:25.
3:25.
One moment. Alex has one thing to say.
We do have these brochures that we made. We have Torture Survivor Speakers Bureau, so you can invite Daryl or other survivors to your city.
And while you're all standing, we can give everyone in the room another hand.